$15,000. That's not a small amount of money. That took time, that took saying no to things, that took some version of discipline or sacrifice or just grinding through months where you could have spent it but didn't. So when someone tells you to do something with your savings, there's a real reason you hesitate, because that number means something, and the last thing you want to do is make a decision that makes it smaller. So you leave it in the bank, which feels responsible, which feels safe, which is, mathematically speaking, one of the most expensive decisions you can make. And I want to show you exactly why. Not with opinions, not with pressure, just with the numbers laid out in a way that I genuinely wish someone had shown me earlier. Let's start with what's actually happening to that $15,000 right now while it sits there. The average traditional savings account in the United States is currently paying 0.01% interest annually. That number is not a typo, 0.01%. On $15,000, that earns you $1.50 per year, $1.50. You could find that in a parking lot. Meanwhile, the bank is taking your $15,000, lending it out at 7, 8, 9%, and handing you $1.50 as a thank you. But the interest rate is almost beside the point, because there's a second thing happening simultaneously that most people don't think about. And this one is silent, and it is relentless. Inflation. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks purchasing power every year, and when you look at the last decade of data, the picture is uncomfortable. Between 2015 and 2025, cumulative inflation in the United States ran approximately 34%. That means something that cost $15,000 in 2015 costs roughly $20,100 today. Your $15,000 didn't move, everything else did. Let me make that more concrete, because purchasing power is one of those phrases that sounds academic until you translate it. In 2015, $15,000 was enough for a full year of in-state college tuition at many public universities. Today, that same year costs closer to $20,000 at those same schools. In 2015, the average used car cost about $14,700. Today, that number is just over $25,000. In 2015, you could rent a one-bedroom apartment in a mid-sized American city for around $950 a month. Your $15,000 covered more than 15 months of rent. In many of those same cities today, that rent is $1,400 or higher. Your $15,000 didn't shrink on paper, but its ability to do real things in the real world, quietly eroded while you weren't watching. Now here's where I want to slow down, because this is the part that actually matters. Let's run two versions of the last 10 years side by side. Same person, same $15,000 in January 2015, two different decisions. Person A puts the money in a standard savings account and leaves it alone. Person B puts the same $15,000 into a broad market index fund, something that simply tracks the overall stock market. And also leaves it alone. No active trading, no watching the news every morning, completely passive. Person A, after 10 years, $15,015. That's with the 0.01% interest compounding annually, $15,015, a decade of patience, rewarded with the price of a dinner out. Now let's do person B, and I want to walk through this year by year because the shape of this matters as much as the final number. The S&P 500, the index that tracks the 500 largest American companies, has returned an average of approximately 10.7% annually over the last 30 years, according to data from Macro Trends. I'm going to use around 10% for this math to be conservative. Year 1, $15,000 becomes $16,500. That's $1,500 in growth. Fine, not exciting. Year 2, $16,500 becomes $18,150. Now you've made $1,650, more than year 1, and you did nothing differently. Year 3, $18,150 becomes $19,965. You just crossed $20,000. The account that started at $15,000 is now worth more than what inflation says $15,000 should be worth. You've broken even against the cost of living, with 7 years still to go. Year 4, $19,965 becomes $21,961. Year 5, $21,961 becomes $24,157. At the halfway mark, person B has $24,000, person A has $15,008. The gap is already $9,000. And this is where the math starts doing something that human intuition is genuinely bad at understanding. Year 6, $24,157 becomes $26,573. Year 7, $26,573 becomes $29,230. Year 8, $29,230 becomes $32,154. Year 9, $32,154 becomes $35,369. Year 10, $35,369 becomes $38,906. Person B ends the decade with $38,906. Person A ends the decade with $15,015. The gap between doing nothing and doing the bare minimum. One decision, made once, a decade ago, is $23,891. That's almost a year and a half of median American rent. That's a car. That's the gap between having options and not having them. And here's the thing that really stopped me when I was building this out. In year 1, person B made $1,500. By year 10, they made $3,537 in a single year. On money they never added to, never touched, never thought about. That last year of growth alone is more than twice what person A earned over the entire decade. That's compound interest. And it doesn't feel real until you see it in a table year by year, watching the annual gains get larger even though the inputs never changed. There's a detail buried in this that almost nobody talks about. When person B's account earned $1,500 in year 1, that $1,500 didn't disappear. It became part of the principal. In year 2, the 10% return applied to $16,500, not $15,000. So $1,650 was earned. That $1,650 then became part of the principal. In year 3, the 10% applied to $18,150. Your earnings are earning, and then their earnings start earning. It's not a metaphor. It's literally what the account statement shows. The reason this is so hard to act on isn't that people don't understand it intellectually. It's something else entirely. The behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying how humans evaluate risk and reward, and one of his most replicated findings is that losses feel roughly twice as painful as equivalent gains feel good. In practical terms, the fear of losing $1,000 is psychologically more powerful than the pleasure of gaining $1,000. This is called loss aversion, and it is the primary reason people leave money in savings accounts they know are doing nothing. Because the savings account feels safe. You can see the number. It doesn't go down. In 2008, in 2020, in any volatile month, the bank account stays at $15,000. The index fund might temporarily read $11,000. Even if you know rationally that it will recover, watching it say $11,000 triggers something in your nervous system that the rational brain has trouble overriding. And the financial industry knows this. Traditional banks have spent decades making checking and savings accounts feel like the responsible adult choice, the place where serious people keep their money. The interest rate is almost never prominently advertised. There's no notification that says, "Hey, inflation just reduced your purchasing power by 4% this year." The number on the screen stays the same, which your brain reads as stability, which your brain reads as good. But stable and safe are not the same thing. And the cost of confusing them over a decade is almost $24,000 on a single $15,000 decision. There's also something happening socially that makes this harder. When the market drops, and it will drop, sometimes dramatically, it's everywhere. News alerts, social media, panicked conversations. When the market quietly grows 11% in a year, almost nobody talks about it. Negative financial events are dramatically overrepresented in our information environment relative to positive ones. So if the only time you hear about the market is when something goes wrong, your internal model of what the market does will be wrong. The S&P 500 has had positive annual returns in approximately 73% of all calendar years since 1928. According to data compiled by NYU's Stern School of Business, nearly 3 out of every 4 years, it goes up. The years it goes down are real. 2008 was brutal, 2022 was uncomfortable. But they are the minority, and the recovery periods that follow them are part of the math we just ran. So what do you actually do with this? First, find out what your savings account is actually paying. Open your banking app right now, not later, right now, and find your annual percentage yield. If it's under 4%, you are leaving money on the table in an environment where high-yield savings accounts at online banks are paying between 4 and 5%. That's not an investment. That's still a savings account, FDIC insured, same protection, just paying you $600 a year on $15,000 instead of $1.50. Moving your emergency fund to a high-yield account is not a risky decision. It is just a less lazy decision. Second, understand the difference between your emergency fund and your long-term savings. Your emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses, should be liquid, accessible, and in something like that high-yield savings account. But money you don't plan to touch for 5 years or more? That money is paying a very real cost by sitting still. Third, if your employer offers a 401k match and you're not taking the full match, you are turning down free money at a mathematically provable level. A 3% employer match on a $75,000 salary is $2,250 per year. That is additional compensation you are declining. It is the highest guaranteed return available to most people, and it requires no market knowledge whatsoever. Fourth, the single most important variable in compound growth is not how much you invest. It's how long the money has to grow. A 25-year-old who puts in $15,000 and never adds another dollar will end up with more than a 35-year-old who contributes $15,000 every single year for 10 years, assuming the same 10% annual return. Time is the input that money cannot buy back. Every year of inaction is a year removed from the end of the compounding curve, and that last year, as we saw, is worth more than the first 3 combined. Fifth, you do not need to understand individual stocks or earnings calls or interest rate policy to do the bare minimum here. A single broad market index fund. One fund that you contribute to consistently and don't touch is what the math above describes. That's it. That's the whole strategy for someone starting out. The complexity comes later if you want it. The entry point is much simpler than the financial industry has any incentive to make it seem. Here's what I want you to walk away with. The question was never really about interest rates or index funds or inflation percentages. The question is what a decade of your life is worth. Because that's what we're actually talking about. 10 years passed for person A and person B in the exact same way. Same mornings, same commutes, same life. One of them ended the decade with $38,906. One of them ended it with $15,015. The difference wasn't income, wasn't luck, wasn't expertise. It was one decision made once and then the patience to leave it alone. I've been thinking a lot about the way we talk about financial risk. Because we almost always frame it as the risk of losing money. But there's another kind of risk that doesn't show up in any warning label, the risk of doing nothing. The risk that the $15,000 you were protecting so carefully is worth $10,500 in real purchasing power a decade from now, and you never saw it happen because the number on the screen never changed. Inaction has a price. It's just a price you pay in slow motion, in installments, across years, which is exactly why it's so easy to ignore until it's too late to do much about it. The money you're not making right now isn't a future problem. It's already happening. The clock on compound interest is always running. The only question is whether it's running for you or against you. I'll be getting into exactly how to evaluate where your money should go depending on your timeline and tax situation. And the math on that one reframes some things I thought I understood. If you want to keep seeing this kind of breakdown, you know what to do. The most expensive thing you can do with money is nothing at all.